friends, I am so excited to bring you my friend and somebody that I am so honored to have in my life, Allilsa. I cannot wait for everyone to hear Allilsa's story, her scars. This is an incredible SCAR Initiative interview, and let's just dive right in. So Allilsa, I will turn it over to you, but I do want to say I did meet Allilsa at our Ignite National a few years ago. We sat next to each other, hit it off. We just have become really awesome. I mean, she's my awesome friend. I love talking to Allilsa. She is just a phenomenal person whenever it comes to policy, mental health. She is my go-to person. So Allilsa, I would like to turn it over to you and have you introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me. Likewise, I remember that time I sat next to you and it was awesome. I was like, yes. Oh, so sorry. Phone rang. My name is Allilsa. My pronouns are she, he, they. I'm a consultant and I've worked in policy. I'm also a disability and mental health activist. I've worked for companies such as Lionsgate, Facebook, and Verizon, specifically on mental health and disabilities. And I've also been ahead of policy changes in universities. So that's like a little bit of me.
That is fantastic. Can you tell the viewers, how did you get into the arena of mental health and policy?
So interesting enough, I wasn't studying to do anything with policy. I wasn't even thinking about that at all. Never even crossed my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually in Stony Brook University. I was studying psychology, and I was thinking about social work. That's what I was thinking of, and becoming a therapist. But along the way, there were a lot of injustices on our campus, particularly there was a friend, but also someone who was a part of the organization I founded, Peer Mental Health Alliance. They came and they were like, hey, suddenly I'm being kicked out because I'm experiencing a mental health crisis.
Oh my gosh.
Long story short, I ended up finding out that this is a common problem across so many campuses across the state, which is the medical leave policies. And basically the medical leave policies, they tend to see people with mental illness or mental crisis, however folks define it. They tend to see the folks having those experiences as liability. So instead of seeing them as human beings, they're like, oh, we got to get them off campus. If something happens, I don't want to be blamed. I don't want to deal with the lawsuit. We got to get them off. And so it places the liability before the person. And therefore, most times folks are not considered for accommodations. They're not considered for disability resources. Basically, there's so much resources that are overlooked because it's like, how can I get rid of you? Right. And so this particular person came to me and I was like, wow, this is an injustice. So along the way, as we started to advocate for that, we then found out that there was folks who couldn't use the bathroom because they had disabilities and the doors, the automatic buttons were not working. So these are folks who were holding their urines for a long period of times. It's so inhumane. We discovered that folks were not eating past 6 or 8 p.m. Sorry, because
no, you're good. You're good.
The buses that were wheelchair accessible, they were not running past a certain time. So if folks were up studying or they were hungry and they didn't have food in their dorms, they just went hungry because they couldn't get to the cafeteria because there wasn't an accessible ride. And even though a lot of the buses were supposed to be accessible, they weren't. We also found out there was a lot of buildings that were inaccessible. The programmings were inaccessible. So there was just a lot of things going on. And that's maybe the short version of how I got into policy. After that, I was just like, oh, wow, I'm really into this. I'm passionate about changes. I realized that at the root of social work and therapy, there also has to be a substantial change in laws and policies. And so that's how I got into policy.
That is fantastic. You had a huge movement on your university.
Yes.
What is that university's policy like now compared to where it was before?
Oh, it was a big turnaround. So the automated buttons, they were checked periodically, and they actually updated in every single television across campus where to report those buttons.
Oh my gosh.
You had issues, who you can consult, like who you can call to get them immediately replaced. But they also changed the announcements on the programming, even though lately I checked and they're not following through, but at least for a certain time they did change.
Right.
There's trainings now for, which I thought was phenomenal, for every single person that's a leader in an organization or club. So if you're a treasurer, president, vice president, and you're part of an organization, you have to take a disability training. And the school became more active and more involved when it came to disability rights and ensuring that there was accessibility, at least to a certain degree.
Sure. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that was a big turnaround.
Imagine, oh my gosh, a lot of people say, well, what does it matter? You know, my voice and just one person, but one person can make a huge difference, a huge change that's going to affect thousands of people possibly. You don't know how many people are going to be affected by that. And just think of the number of people that needed that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and also taking into consideration that who comes together, you know, one of the things that happened in our campus, which was phenomenal, was it wasn't just the disability group that was out there. For years, what I heard from the disability organization was, nobody wants to join us. Nobody wants to be a part of this. Really? Nobody wants to help advocate with us. And there was a struggle, but it's also, I feel, the way that they were structured before, where they were holding events, but a little bit segregated. That's why I personally formed Peer Mental Health Alliance. One of the things I've noticed with mental health organizations, even till this day, especially on campus, is they're waiting for people to come to them. So one of the things I did when I first started the university was that I went to Active Minds on campus, and I said, hey, would you go out there? Will you engage people in the conversation? And they were like, oh, no, that's not how we operate. That's not what we're going to do. And so long story short, that's how I started Peer Mental Health Alliance 2 years later. And so one of the things that we did is mental health is everywhere. And it impacts everyone.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Yes. So we were like, okay, we're going to go to the football games. We're going to go to the basketball games. We're going to go to the dances. We're going to go to dentistry clubs. We're going to go to organizations that are helping with the homeless shelters or food pantries. I mean, everywhere. And we're not waiting for people to come to us, because there is this stigma. So it's very hard for people to come to us. Instead, we're going to go to people and say, hey, this is normal. Having a mental health experience, whether that's depression, anxiety, psychosis, it's okay. It's okay. And normalizing the conversation. Absolutely. This is something that happens to so many people. And you'd be surprised how many people were willing to talk about their own struggles once we started to do that. So going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that that's what made the difference this time around, because since we were going into different groups, Oh my God, there was sororities joined us,
Wow.
different organizations joined us. We even had people off campus that were very active in organizing, whether politically or for disability or
Yeah.
for other causes. They came out and supported. We had teachers, professors, faculty members who came out, and I say teachers because they came from other schools,
Yeah.
and it wasn't even people with disabilities. It was just people that said, "I'm going to stand for this cause," and I think that that made a difference because when the university saw, whoa, it's not just the people with disabilities.
Right.
Look at all the people who came out from all across the board,
Yes.
and they're demanding equity, and they're demanding that we pay attention.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to pay attention and we're going to address this issue. So, yeah.
Incredible. I mean, it shows that you can't ever judge a disability by what somebody looks like on the outside. Ever. Ever. You never know what somebody is going through on the inside. I mean, it's imperative that people realize you have to have that conversation, and you have to be inclusive. You have to have that equity. You just have to have that mindset of including everybody from every walk of life, doesn't matter where they're from. And you did that. You did that.
But I also give thanks to other folks that joined us, like the professors. They were phenomenal. We have professors, and that's the thing, having people in power,
right,
using their power for good it's amazing. We have professors who had tenure, and they said, I can't get fired, so I'm going to protest, and I'm going to have our students join the protest. So they were using their power and their authority for good, and that's important. I wouldn't say it's just me. If I would say that, that's a lie. It really takes a village. We had so many people across the board marching, chanting, and the way that they showed up in so many different ways, whether that was using a wheelchair or walker or no devices, whatever way that people showed up, it was just amazing. There was people who couldn't, for example, join us in the protest because of sensory, feeling overwhelmed with sensory, but they did the signs, and they helped other folks, have signs. So everyone just came together in their own different ways, and they really made the changes possible. Like, if I was to sit here and say it was just me, no, it really takes a village.
It does. It takes a huge movement of people. You got the ball rolling, you got it started, and it grew into people who saw something so powerful that it made a difference, and it made those changes, which is a great introduction to our next phase of the conversation, which is about the scars that you've chosen to highlight. So why don't you talk to the viewers about what particular scars that are important to you, or what you've chosen, and how these are very significant in your life?
I guess I can start with coming out as queer. Even just this week, I saw a 12-year-old who died of suicide. And it was because the kids were taunting him and bullying him for being gay. Wow. And mind you, this is a 12-year-old who's still exploring his sexuality, very young in age. There's nothing concrete. And yet there's these kids just picking on him. And it just reminded me of my own story and why I wanted to share it today. If there's someone watching, whether they're, 18 or 50, because there's folks who come out later in life, 50, 60, 70, 80, so just wanting to share that. But I remember before I even came out, I remember kids were bullying me. I had folks who threw juice at me, pull my hair, kick me in the back. They would trick me with my lunch tray, and they would call me Dyke. I mean, I was 9, 10 years old. I didn't even know what the word dyke meant. I was like, what is dyke? What does that even mean? But these older kids knew. And so they were calling me these names. And for a long time, once I did know, hey, I'm queer, I didn't want to come out because of those experiences. It was just absolutely, absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
And it took a lot for me to come out when I was about 17 years old. I first came out to folks that were already accepting of me entirely. And so that made it easier. So my cousin, my best friend, my sister, and sure enough, they were very accepting, very loving. You know, they were like, we're going to love you regardless. This is okay.
Right.
You know, but when I told my mom, oh my God, that was a very tough time. I remember that she was like, oh, if this is who you are, I'm not going to talk to you. This is against God and this is sinful. And she just rejected me completely. And for months, she would place my food separate from everyone else and she wouldn't hand it to me. I was disgusting. I was horrible. I was despicable. But here's the thing, you know, and here's another scar. I went through a lot of abuse as a child. And in our family, there was a lot of pedophiles and a lot of men who were very abusive to their wives. You know, I won't disclose their story because I feel like that's for them to say. But I will say a lot of women were physically, verbally, and emotionally abused. And no one was disgusted with them. So here you are, these pedophiles, these rapists, these abuser, and folks are like, oh, we got to serve them. You know, and it's also part of the Latinx culture of the older generation. You know, we got to serve these men. We got to cater to them. We got to provide for them. Oh, they're coming to eat. We got to get them coffee. And these people are not seen as despicable, but yet here I am with consenting partners.
Right.
They are older at my age, and it's despicable. And that's very hard to comprehend. And so long story short, I ended up in a shelter, a youth shelter, because I couldn't get a job. And the situation in my house was just so hostile. And I ended up in a youth shelter. And there I witnessed so many things that you just don't even think you'll see, you know. It makes me tear up because I remember my friends who were 16 and 15-year-old. One was 19-year-old, and they were sex workers, not because they wanted to, not because this is the life they wanted to live, but because of survival. And in fact, they will come back to the shelter and talk about how they were raped, how they were abused, how they hated living this way, but they had no other way to get food. And if anyone's ever been in a shelter, you know that it's very challenging to get a job with a shelter address. Very challenging. And so you can't get a job, but you got to eat. And then the shelter doesn't really give you healthy food. Oftentimes, I remember we were giving green bread. That's how moldy it was, you know, and the oatmeal, it was so black with lint coming out of it. I'm like, you're serving this, you have to have noticed, but it's like humanity is lost. And so it's either you got to fend for yourself to eat, or you're going to eat this mold. Either way, something's got to give. And so, you know, they were surviving it. And I remember that one of my friends said, and I'm not sharing their identities or anything, because again, I'm a big believer of folks sharing their own stories. But I remember my friends sharing and wanting to protect their identity. But I remember my friends sharing how their parents were Christian. And they said, you know, I can't understand how they're Christian and they're supposed to be about love and acceptance and supportive, and they feed the homeless, they go to jail, they do all of these things, but I'm their kid and they kick me out.
Right.
You know, I had left because the situation had become so hostile. But for my friends, they were literally kicked out. Their parents was like, get out. Without luggage, without clothes, just whatever they were wearing. 16 years old,
Oh my
15 years old. It's just like, what goes on in your mind? How do you process that? And so that was very traumatic for me. You know, my own experience, my own lived experience, but then having to witness those stories and listen to those stories, that was traumatic as well. Sure. So those are scars, you know, that were very early on.
Wow. You raised such a great point about the people that we see ourselves around, or that in the newspaper, media, whatever, that do these heinous things. And I don't know if people forgive them or not, or how they treat them, but it's to see that and to have you put that into context of your own family, side by side, you against a pedophile. I mean, to me, it would be a no-brainer. I would give you unconditional love over somebody who has done this horrific crime, and what you're doing is not a crime at all. You're just being you.
I went to church one time. Oh my God, I'll never forget that guy. And I called him out on it too.
Wow.
And when he was preaching, he says, one day a lady told me, oh, my daughter is with a man that beats her and cheats on her. Can you pray for me? And can you pray for my daughter so that she can get out of that situation? And he's preaching, right? And he goes, ha, 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 ha. I asked her, is she a lesbian? And she said, no. I said, lady, praise God. Hallelujah. Worship the Lord, because there could be worse things. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
so it's okay to beat a woman.
Right.
It's okay to hurt her. It's okay to almost take away her life. But it is wrong, and it is sinful, and it is abomination, and it is the worst thing in the world to be a lesbian. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
It makes no sense. So, and I told him, I said, listen, that message is wrong.
Yes.
You are literally saying it is okay to beat a woman and to put someone in harm's way.
Yeah.
You know, and this is not a person that's consenting towards that. And that's traumatic. But you're preaching against two adults that are consenting adults to love. Makes no sense.
I am just, wow. I don't even know what to say, because it's just, you think that is such bullshit. What the fuck is wrong with people? How can somebody who's, that's what I don't understand either, as somebody who was raised in a church. I was never raised to outcast somebody. I was always raised to accept and to love, because not one person walking this planet is perfect. I don't care who you are. Everybody's got something that is either wrong with them. They could be the best person in the world, but everybody's got something that is wrong with them. And you living your life is not wrong at all. You being you is exactly what somebody else could take a lesson from, because you're being so authentic to you. That's why I was so excited to talk with you, is because I love you for who you are. You are one of the most genuine humans I have ever met in my life. And it's just, I want
it took time to build for that. Yeah, I hope we dive into it later on too. Yeah. I don't know if you wanted me to share the other scars as well.
Sure, yes. Whatever scars you feel comfortable sharing, please.
Yeah, okay. So I would say not the fact that I was diagnosed with psychosis. So I live with psychosis. I don't think for me, that's a scar. What's a scar though, and sadly, it still remains to this day for a lot of people, is the fact that a lot of mental health spaces don't talk about it. So we hear a lot of awareness around suicide and depression, which is still great, But at what point are you going to discuss bipolar, psychosis, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, like all of these other things, and speaking about them as in terms that people know about them, because I'm also not a big believer on diagnosis, but I do know that for some folks that is helpful, just to know, hey, this is what's happening to me.
Sure.
And now I'm understanding my experiences. Even though I don't believe in diagnose in the term of treatment, like, oh, you're psychotic and you need this, and like that medicalized, put down type of way, sure. Diagnosed, no. But I did enjoy the fact that I found out that I had PTSD with psychosis, because I was like, whoa, that makes sense. I'm hypervigilant. Okay, how do I deal with that? What are the coping skills? Well, and I'm hearing voices, that's psychosis. Okay, and what are coping skills for that? And so it was just very helpful for me to go through the journey. But the scar there, I believe, is just the fact that I didn't have resources readily available to me. In school, especially in the beginning of school, I heard, hey, if you ever feel depressed, you can go to your counselor and talk about it. But when I started hearing voices, I was like, what do I turn to? Where do I go?
Yeah.
And all I had in my mind was movies that I had seen. And this is why media representation is so important, because all I ever thought about was a straitjacket, being beat, being called a monster and evil and horrible. And that's a scar, because I internalized all that. I was like, I can't tell people that I'm hearing voices. I can't tell them that I'm seeing things, because if I tell them that, I'm a monster, I'm wicked, I'm horrible. This is all I've ever seen in media. So they're going to think that of me. And then I started thinking that of myself. I'm like, I'm a horrible person. I'm a horrible person. I'm a monster. I'm evil. Oh my God, I'm wicked. I'm wicked, wicked. Because of media representation. Because that's what they make it out to be, like you're a monster and you're evil. And then come to find out, I'm none of that. This is just an experience that I'm having, a mental health experience. And so I had to do a lot of unlearning. And I had to just go through it myself and say, I love myself. I'm not a monster. I'm not evil. I'm not wicked. I have these experiences. They are different than other folks, but they're just experiences. And they don't make me less worthy. And then, bringing that out to the rest of the world as well. Because once people hear the word psychosis, that's what it's linked to. Because again, that representation. So I would say it's not the diagnose or the knowing of these experiences that's the scar, but it's the way that it's still represented in media, the way people still perceive it, and the way that it's not talked about, and there's no resources or support readily available. Like oftentimes it's not even talked about. I remember our university, they were so happy to put on an event in September for Suicide Awareness Month, but nothing about psychosis. And yet the first episode, and this is research, the first experience of psychosis is more likely to happen during your college years.
Right.
So why are we not talking about it? And if we talk about psychosis in itself, you'll find out that it's more common than people think. If you talk about schizophrenia, that's 1%.
Yeah.
If you talk about bipolar, that's a small percent. But when you talk about psychosis, which is a part of schizophrenia, which can be a part of schizophrenia, not that it is, because everybody experiences it differently, but it can be a part of schizophrenia, it can be a part of bipolar, it can be a part of PTSD, of depression, so forth. You'll find out it's so common. Even people who are going through COVID, many of them report experiencing psychosis. And doctors report it's because of the hypoxia, the lack of oxygen in the brain that leads to that. Urinary tract infection can lead to psychosis. Thyroid issues can lead to psychosis. Anemia can lead to psychosis. Like, there's so much that can lead to psychosis. It's actually a more common experience than we think. And then if you talk about psychics and religious people who talk to God and hear voices, woo, it's a common experience. But we still treat it like, oh, the 1%, and they're scary, and they're evil, and they're monsters. And that really creates a scar. That's why I'm glad that we're sharing in this space, and that I get to talk about it, because I hope that folks who are listening in know, one, people with psychosis are not monsters. It is a very rare occurrence when folks become violent with psychosis, but it can happen with anything else. It can happen with depression. It can happen with just being a human being. Anyone else can be angry. Someone with psychosis is not more likely to become angry or violent than someone else. And so to call someone with psychosis violent automatically, that's just a big misconception. And then the other thing is folks categorizing people with psychosis with a certain perspective. Oftentimes I get, I've lost track of how many people have told me, you don't look like you live with psychosis. I'm like,
famous words.
What does that mean? For you, what does that mean? Like, and they're like, you smell good. I'm like, so people with psychosis are supposed to stink?
What, are you supposed to look like you're homeless or something, or that you're just
and here's the thing. What is homelessness? I was homeless for a few months to maybe like close to a year. And then later on in age, I was homeless again. And I was in suits. I was dressed up because I was looking for a job. So what is homelessness? That's another misconception. People think it's broken clothes and a smell to you and all of these things. What people don't realize is oftentimes when someone does smell, or someone doesn't have clean clothes, or they have holes in their clothes, it's not because oftentimes they choose this lifestyle, but rather there's a lack of access. So if people are living in the streets, they don't get the clothes, or if they're living in shelters, especially now with COVID, a lot of shelters are not accepting clothes. And even to begin with, they don't really donate clothes that often. So getting clothes is not as easy as people think. Having access to a bathroom to bathe is not as easy as people think. I remember back in that youth shelter, I had to beg for soap. We ended up reporting that lady, because she literally was like, oh, just go rinse yourself. And it's like, no, little cup of soap. So when we think about these things, it's not homelessness. It's the lack of access to a lot of things that are needed. And so going back to psychosis, that's such a misconception, thinking that, people are going to smell, or they're going to look, quote, quote, homeless. They have this stereotype, and it's just so far from the truth. And then the other misconception is, if you have psychosis, and I have friends who live with psychosis and they've said they've gotten the same thing. You can't possibly think, you can't possibly process things, and you can't possibly comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
What? What? That is so ableist. That is so ableist.
It is.
So these are the things that really create scars. And that's why I'm sharing them, because it's not just me. I've heard from other folks, not everyone, but there are some folks who have had similar experiences, and it's a very isolating experience. Like, who do you talk to? Who do you turn? And when you're seeking jobs and wanting to return to school, how can you be open about your experiences when there's a lot of stereotype and stigma and put downs and bias? Okay. So those are the things that really do create the scar.
Oh, that is a really important framework that you have presented on stereotypes specifically, because I remember before I started doing advocacy work for women veterans and realizing that homelessness comes, just as an example, in so many forms. What you see on the street is not probably what the majority is. Most people are either couch surfing, bouncing from shelter to shelter, living in a vehicle, staying at a friend's house for a certain amount of time. All of these are different ways that somebody can be homeless. So just like that, there's so many different ways that people experience mental health. And for your psychosis, what somebody doesn't understand is that you are very much able to do all of these things. There's just another component to you that you have learned about yourself and you are working through. And these are things that I'm hearing from you. And can you tell people from your experience, because by no means is it anything like what people portray dissociative identity disorder on movies, being serial killers or anything like that. That is such a Hollywood example of mental health to the extreme. So give us a day of what it would be like for you to experience psychosis.
Yeah, and before I even dive in, it's not even the extreme, but it's also a pure misconception.
Yeah, absolutely.
Recently Maid came out, which is on Netflix.
Right.
And the way they portray mental illness is just like, why? And the thing is, a lot of younger folks are getting their information from television.
True.
So if this is what you're putting out there, and then someone's struggling, who do they turn to?
Right.
How do they open up? You're already telling them you're a killer, you're a psycho, you're wicked, you're all of these horrible labels. You're really just shutting down a person who may be in crisis from seeking support from even their friends and family. So for me, so I live with psychosis, oftentimes because I'm doing a lot of work and I'm very active with the community. I think people tend to forget that I live with psychosis,
Sure.
Because I have these down times, and it's part of just living with psychosis. And oftentimes it's like people are like, oh yeah, we forgot you live with psychosis. Like, yes, it's not something that, to me at least, is ever going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't think there is a cure. And, I've heard from other people, and I have to agree, even if there was a cure, I personally wouldn't want it, because I've learned to live with it and I enjoy it. There's perks to it. For me, I see psychosis as a gift. So I do get premonition. I do get visions that come to life. I've been able to tell other people of things that are going to happen, and they do end up happening. I myself get told things. and it prevents me from things happening, or it pushes me to do things for the better.
Yeah.
So basically, I feel I'm spiritually guided,
Wow.
and so that's a gift.
Yeah.
But I feel, and this is my own experience, and this is the best way for me to explain my own personal experience. I feel I have a gift that is connected into a different realm.
Gotcha.
And in this realm, it's so challenging to keep it and process it. I know for a fact, none of us, no human being is going to remain alive. We're all going to transpire or transition, however folks want to call it. For me, that is going into a different realm.
Mm-hmm.
Some people call it heaven, some people call it hell, some people call it planes. Whatever it is, I personally feel we go to a different realm.
Yeah.
I feel that my gifts are connected to the spiritual realm. So a realm that is not going to be permanent here. Right. But I have to adjust to this realm, and it's hard. It's very hard to adjust to this realm because this is the earth realm. And so to me, that's why I feel like it's then a disability, because it hinders me from some things, which is okay. Yeah. Which is okay. I'll dive in a little bit, but it just, that balance of trying to figure out things in this realm, it leaves me imbalanced, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so it creates, I wouldn't say issues, because the lack of access is what creates issues, but it creates a battle with the lack of accommodations that exist for people who are experiencing these experiences that for me is spiritual. So a day in my psychosis is that I get messages, I get told things, and they often happen, but other times I struggle because it's like my body leaves this realm. Mm-hmm. And so I'm no longer connected to what we call real. This is reality. Earth is reality. The floor that's here with me in this space is reality for now. And so I have to learn, and I've learned how to connect from the spiritual world back into what we call reality. But it's not that it's not real. It's just different for me. And so sometimes that creates confusion for me, because I'll say, am I in my room, for example? This looks like my room. I think this is my room, but this might not be my room. But spiritually, I know this is not going to be my room. So it does make sense. Sure. But in this realm, this is my room. And I've witnessed people as characters, like cartoons, which is part of my dissociation. And so I see folks talking, but it's almost like, hey, this is like a script, and this is what's supposed to be taking place right now. Absolutely. But it's everything that's supposed to play out, but for another realm that we're going to go into. Yeah. But anyway, so that's the struggle for me, the struggle between what we call real in this earth and what's spiritual. And so sometimes the voices come randomly. And so I've learned to make space. And I've taught the voices, hey, at this time, spiritually, you can talk to me. But in other times, don't talk to me. But sometimes they want to talk to me when it's not appropriate. And I see. Okay. That's overwhelming. Yeah. And that then it's a struggle for me because I'll start hearing it. The best way to describe it is 50 radios going on, and they're all at different genres of music, bass, sounds. Just to give like a little description of what it's like for me. Like just turn on different 50 radios at different stations with bachata, merengue, rap, hip hop, rock, and you put it all together.
Oh gosh.
It's overstimulating. And then you're expected in all of those voices, all of those radios, to listen to the person that's in front of you asking you a question. Wow. It's challenging. It's very challenging because you're overstimulated. There's so much going on to then be able to focus on this one person, you know? And visually, like I said, I'm, it's spiritual. So I'll see white shadows and green shadows, but sometimes they come at what I call inappropriate times because I'm taking a test or I'm doing work and I'm meeting a deadline. And it's like, they're moving around and it's like, not now. What do you do? And so the challenge for me is not the experience, but getting the accommodations, because we still live in a world that doesn't accept that folks are all different with different experiences and different backgrounds. And so the accommodations for me living with psychosis, it requires a lot of advocating. And again, if I'm already overwhelmed because I have 50 radios and a person talking in front of me, now I'm supposed to advocate for myself on top of that. And I'm supposed to tell you what I need. And it's just very difficult. It's very overwhelming. So that's a little bit of my experience with psychosis.
What age did you start experiencing your first psychosis? Is it what am I using the right word? Is it a psychotic episode or psychosis episode?
Psychosis. I would say psychosis. For me, other folks do identify with psychotic experiences.
Sure.
I call it a psychosis experience.
Okay.
But the first time that it was scary to me was when I was 26 years old. I was in the university. And again, it was very spiritual. I remember that I went into this event. It was science-based. I don't care for science stuff, like meaning career-wise, but there was free food. So
college students need to eat.
Yes, have to survive. Right. So I went in for the free food and I heard this voice and it said, fill out the card for, at those times it was what they called iPods.
Okay.
So the ones that you circle around for the music.
Yeah.
I'm old, I'm giving away.
I know we're dating ourselves.
So it was an iPod and I heard this voice, fill it up. You're gonna win. And mind you, the room had like about 300, a good 300 amount of people. Yeah. So I was like, there's no way I'm gonna win this thing. Why would a voice tell me that? But I'm gonna do it. And I filled it out. And the voice said, you're gonna get called. And literally 2 seconds later, the lady was like, Allilsa.
Oh my gosh.
Whoa. So that was the good voice. That's what I call the good voice.
Right.
But from that experience, I had what I call, a demonic experience. So I had a lot of visions of blood, people getting murder, violence, voices that were like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. And very violent and very horrible things. With a therapist, though, I'm glad that those voices are gone. I ended up processing with her and she goes, think about it. Someone said that to you. It's like, no, nobody has ever said that to me. And it was a traumatic experience when I was a child.
Really?
That I experienced someone telling me, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you. And I was like, whoa, and then after that, that voice went away. But it shows how trauma can manifest itself, whether it's spiritually or through psychosis experiences, And but I would say, that's the first time that I got that I experienced a psychosis experience in the way of being scared, and in the way of a quote unquote diagnose. Like, whoa, I should talk to somebody about this. I should really seek support. But really, if I look back at my very early childhood, I've always seen things. Always. I remember being 7 and 8 years old, and I saw very, very clearly people dressed in white, and they had their kids, and they were walking around in my house. And then I saw people who were dressed in darkness, which I would call the negative entities. And they were walking. But as a kid, I wasn't scared. It was so weird. It's like I understood it was spiritual, and the similar things. I will get presented when there was going to be a car accident, and then there was a car accident, or voices telling me don't get in the car, and I wouldn't, and then that person ended up getting hurt. So I very early on, I had these experience, where voices would tell me, hey, the train's coming. Things like that. I remember that, but it wasn't scary. It was, to me, just a part of my life, a part of just being spiritual, and it wasn't until I was 26 that I was like, okay. But I did end up sharing my experience with someone in the university. And ironically, instead of her saying, hey, go see a psychiatrist, this is something you need to take care of, she said to me, oh, you're having a spiritual battle. Don't worry, you're going to learn how to control it, and you're going to balance it off. I've heard voices too. This is what I'm talking about. We don't normalize it. We don't talk about psychosis, And then when I tell my aunt, she goes, oh, I've heard voices. Don't worry, you're going to learn how to cope with it. And if you look at the history of psychosis, which I find that so interesting, the Native Americans, when someone is experiencing what we call psychosis, they don't call it psychosis. They call it a spiritual awakening. They go through a process, and eventually this person becomes a shaman, which is a healer. And if you look at our ancestor in the Latinx culture, it was passed down on how to cope with these voices. When they manifested in your life, it was because you were chosen, and it was part of being spiritual. And you were either going to become what they called curandera, which is sort of like a witch, but not really. It's a healer. Or a santero, which is similar. It was these things that you were going to become that were healing. And if you study Plato, they talk about people who will go to the mountains at certain times of the year, which had very similar experiences with psychosis. And they were there to tell the governors and the public warnings, how to carry through hunger, all these premonitions, and their gifts were used for healing and spiritual guidance. But now we don't want to talk about it.
not
It's a
now.
shame.
Yeah.
Monsters, killers, evil. Oh, shame, 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 shame. And I'm like
Right.
saying, for everyone, this is a spiritual journey. This is what it means. I don't want anyone listening in and saying, oh, this is what it is. No, 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 no. I'm saying this is what a Jilsa
Right.
experience is like. This is what I interpret it as, and this is how I personally define my own experience. Every person that experienced psychosis is very different.
Sure.
Every person is going to think about it differently, and they're going to see it in a different light. So only sharing my personal experience.
Yes. Just want to clarify that
Yes. I don't want somebody
Jilsa.
watching to say, oh, that's not my experience. Don't put that on me. No, 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 no. Not saying that.
No, everybody is as unique and their experience is as unique as they are. There's no two people who are alike. And so it's really incredible the way that you have described what that psychosis is to you, how it comes across in different ways. It's just incredible for you to be able to share that, because to me, I mean, it gives me chills thinking, I am so glad that somebody has the courage to talk about this experience, because why not? We talk about all other kind of experiences, so why not talk about this one? Because there's going to be more people out there, like you say, that probably can relate to this than want to admit right now. I mean, it's just amazing that you have come so far in your journey. And I know that it hasn't been easy. So how did all of these scars between coming out, the trauma in your family, the psychosis, all of these, how did these scars impact you physically or mentally then versus now?
So with the coming out, oh my God. I'm thinking that's the first time I really started experiencing, no, I'm going to say, sorry, first time. I think the first time I started to experience depression was with the trauma, childhood trauma.
Right.
I was just like, how do I get out? Not really having an adult to advocate for me. And I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I really like how some countries, they have posters for kids. And they tell kids, hey, call this number if you're ever in danger.
Yeah.
Because I remember growing up and it's like, you just didn't have the resources. Right. Nobody told you who you could reach out to if you were struggling. And I really think that teachers personally have a duty to just say that to kids. Hey, if you're ever struggling, you can talk to me, and this is what struggling looks like, whether that's emotional abuse, physical abuse, things like that. And in a kid's way, telling it to a kid, because if you just say, hey, if you're being abused, talk to me, that's very scary. But if you put it in terms like, if you're struggling and you really need to talk to somebody, building up that confidence and that trust. And so I didn't really have that. And I struggled a lot with depression. How do I get out? How do I get out? That was my biggest question growing up. And then I happened to be queer. So now I'm like, oh my God, an additional depression because I can't be gay. I have to wash away my sin. I have to convert, I try to pray it away. I remember spending hours for many years, like, take this away, 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 which now I know it's a part of conversion therapy. I'm sorry, but I didn't know back then.
Yeah.
And that led to depression too, like, what do I do? Who do I talk to? Who do I turn? Who do I trust? And then ending up in the shelter because I left home. Oh man, that was just overwhelming. So I remember the suicidal ideations. I remember, I've never shared this before, never openly, like it's in my diaries, but I've never in my life have shared this publicly, but I feel like, I want to share this. But I remember, I just wanted to die, and I was feeling suicidal, and someone ended up calling the cops, because that's usually what happens when folks are in crisis. I'm just grateful that, unlike today, where and not even unlike today, it used to happen before as well. But I think, now we visibly see it, and we're more conscious that it really happens, because we have films and it's recorded,
Right.
that this really can happen. Cops can really take away your life when you're in a crisis,
That's right.
Fortunately for me, it was a Black cop. And he was absolutely amazing. He could have sat me in the back of the car. He could have arrested me. In fact, I heard another officer, arrest her. And it's like, if someone's going through a crisis, why would you want to arrest them? What sense does that make?
None.
And even to this day, that's like the go-to. Arrest. Why? Why? Compassion. Where's the compassion? Where's the empathy? And I remember that this cop was like, no, you're going to sit down in the front of the car with me. You're a human being. You're not a liability. He didn't say you're not a liability, but I'm saying like the action of him sitting me in the front of the car and talking to me humanely, that's saying you're not a liability, you're human.
That's right.
And I'm going to treat you as a human instead of a liability. And so it was the best conversation of my life. And just being heard and really being able to process what was happening at that point was a turning point for me, because that's how I began to open up. And then I sought support, and that was very helpful for me. So that's how coming out and dealing with trauma really impacted me. But trauma, it's never ending.
That's right.
And I think a lot of folks who has experienced trauma knows this. Like even last night, just last night, it was like out of nowhere. Suddenly I'm back to that moment. It comes right back up, and I've healed. I processed it with my therapist. I processed it with people that I've trust. I've talked about it. I've forgiven people. And forgiveness does not mean letting them back in my life.
That's right.
Forgive, but I'm not going to let you back in my life,
Nope,
I want to let folks know, because they might be listening and say, I have to forgive. No, that's your own journey. You don't have to. Everyone has their own journey. For me, the anger was eating away at me. The anger was affecting my own life. I was self-sabotaging a lot. And so for me, forgiving was so important. I learned something from a Buddhist quote that said, if you keep holding a burning coil, you're just going to burn yourself, even though it's meant for someone else, and so I just had to forgive for me to be able to just carry on with my life, not for the other person, for me. And again, that doesn't mean that I've let them back in. And even to this day, trauma affects me. Last night, it was one of those days, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. I just think that it's just the impact is going to be less. I have coping skills where I can just ground and it's better, but it's just trauma really is ingrained. And I say that because that's the impact of childhood trauma. You just carry it on for the rest of your life. And it shows up in your relationship. It shows up in your work. It shows up in your goals. It shows up in so many ways. And, and it's not until you process that you start saying, whoa, this really has impacted my life. So I had to process and do a lot of work, still doing a lot of work.
Sure.
And for psychosis, I had to process as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I had to love myself. I remember, oh my God, sorry, it makes me tear up because it may seem simple, but it's really not. It's really not.
Yeah.
I remember that I was sitting in my car. This is back when I had a car. And I turned off the ignition after parking and I hugged myself. And I said, I love you. I love you. You're not a monster. You're not wicked. You're not horrible. You're a person who has gone through trauma and you are having a response and you're spiritual. I love you. I love you. And that was so impactful for me. That was so healing for me. And that was like a big turning point for me in processing the stigma that came along with psychosis, the internalized stigma, and all of that. And what I've done with those scars is that I've tried to use it. I say at least try, because you never know the impact, honestly.
That's right.
Only other people and society knows the impact.
Yeah.
But at least I try
Yes.
to use it for good, so
That's right.
Once I've accepted myself fully and loved myself as queer, non-binary, person of color, living with psychosis, I started doing things so that other folks hopefully don't have to go through what I went through. So in the university, I applied for homecoming, not because I wanted to. I really didn't even think about it, to be honest. But a lady that was in my university, she knew that I love advocating for mental health. And she said, you know that that's one of the biggest platform and it can reach even more people. So I was like, oh, this is perfect because I'll apply so that I can talk about mental health. Yeah. But also I'm non-binary, so the rules will change.
That's right.
From homecoming king and queen to royalty, but also more folks can feel comfortable to run who may look like me or identify similar to me, so I did that. And that was a turning point, not just for me, but for the university and for others that come after me. The protests that we talked about earlier, doing that work. I'm not on that campus. Yeah. I'm not gonna probably go back to that campus in a way where I'm gonna need the accommodations that other students need or may need, but other folks who are upcoming, it makes it better for them. Now they can talk about their accommodations, or they might not have to fight for these things that weren't in place. So it's making a better world, hopefully, for someone else. Same thing with homelessness. I try to cook as often because, sorry, like I said before, it was mold. It was mold. It's so inhumane. And so I think about those things and I think about what can I do? Even if it's once a year or twice a year, what can I do that's gonna make a difference, Yeah. So sorry.
Oh no, don't apologize. It's amazing.
I cook and when I cook with so much love and I think about what's healthy, the vegetables, the pasta. I want to cook that people eat good and healthy, because when you're homeless, you don't have a lot of access to healthy food. So I try to think about that. I just try to do the things that I knew could have benefited me. So even though I don't benefit from it anymore, I just hope that for someone else, there's a benefit for them. So even being a consultant now, I don't do it for money. I do it because how can this be better for someone else?
That's
Whether that's in policy or consultant work for films or speaking engagement. I'm always thinking, what can I do in this space that it can be better for someone else or supportive for someone else? So that's how I've taken my scars, and just try to flip it, even with psychosis, like, hey, there wasn't resources. How can I do that? People weren't talking about it. So I felt alone. How can I do those changes? And just say, hey, we could talk about this. It doesn't have to be a hidden topic anymore. It doesn't have to be taboo anymore. There doesn't have to be rejection and isolation. So what are some of the things I can do with whatever space, that I'm invited to or that I can join? Like here, I love sharing this space with you. So I'm thinking always like, what can I do that can benefit someone else?
amazing. It's just so intentional and so authentic that that's the place that you're coming from, because we tend to forget that there are other humans who are experiencing some kind of suffering. So show that compassion and that love, and just leave all the judgment elsewhere. There's no room for it between people. We got to be able to create that space, that openness of, I want you to be you, because nobody is better than the you that you were created. And it sounds like it's been a really good healing journey to experience that intentionality. So how has your healing journey been with these various scars?
Oof.
Heavy question there.
So first off, I remember when I was 16, my mom had sent me to Dominican Republic because of the trauma, and I couldn't concentrate in high school. And back then there was way less resources than there is now. And that was healing in itself, honestly. Just to be out there and change scenery, just take a breather. That was healing for me. But when I came back, she put me in therapy. And let me tell you, if you're forced into therapy or obligated to therapy, oh man, that's a horrible experience. I don't recommend it. I feel like the healing journey has to be your own. Yeah. And it has to be something you yourself decide if that's what you want, right? And I remember that I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, things that were being told to me just didn't make sense. Yeah. Why was I going through this? I just wasn't ready. I didn't want it. And I felt like, in a way, it was a waste of time. But years later, what that therapist said to me did kick in. I wasn't ready. And then I didn't know that there were ways to cope with psychosis until I saw someone, or even with PTSD. But I went to someone's space. They had like a little library. It was a nun. It was a convent. And they had a little book there. And it was about childhood trauma. And so I said, oh, that's interesting. Can I read it? And when I read it, it talked about PTSD. And it didn't talk about psychosis, but it talked about PTSD. And so I said, oh, there's healing and there's ways to cope and ways to manage when things come up. So I'm going to seek a therapist. So I was in Italy when that happened, that discovery. And when I came back, I got a therapist who was an amazing therapist. But again, I wasn't fully ready. And she wanted to do things I wasn't ready to do. So it was too intense for me. And I ended up just dropping. And to me, it's important, pure work. Field work is so vital.
Mm-hmm.
It's, to me, it was the most healing. The most healing. I would not be here with you, talking to you without peers. Absolutely not. Therapists can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of therapists, they have their own agenda.
Yeah.
And they want their clients to move at their pace and their way. And check mark, oh, you did that. Check mark, oh, you did that. And it's just like, whoa, I'm not there yet. I'm not ready. Like,
mm-hmm.
you're trying to do too much, and there were things the therapist was helpful for me. But a lot of it wasn't. So I ended up being experiencing agoraphobic. So I ended up being a lot in my house, just not wanting to leave my house because, like I mentioned before, auditory experiences and hallucinations were just so overwhelming that every time I would take a bus, it was just like I was seeing things, a lot of things, and the human beings. So I'm like, oh my God, how do I take the bus? It's just so much. And then I'm hearing things at the same time. And it's like, how do I focus? And so it was just like, I'm going to stay home. This is just too much. I can't do it. I stopped driving. I even sold my car because I didn't see a point to it, and it was my peers who were helpful. I joined this game called Second Life, which is a virtual game.
Okay.
And it was through my friend, my best friend, who also has had experiences with mental health, just, different things.
Sure.
And she was like, hey, join this game. It's going to be supportive for you. It was healing for me. You might find it healing. And well, long story short, I ended up meeting people with psychosis and people with who live with bipolar and schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder and so forth. And they were phenomenal. They were phenomenal. This one lady, that's how I was able to leave my house. So if you're poor and you have agoraphobia,
oh, geez,
you'll just die there because the therapists don't come to you.
No.
We live in a society with a system, a medical system, that if you miss your appointment 3 times, you're a quote, quote, bad, naughty client. Oh, how dare you? Shame on you. I'm no longer going to see you because you're irresponsible, because you're naughty, because you can't come. Dude, I'm struggling.
Right.
That's what I'm talking to you. I'm struggling.
Exactly.
I can't make it outside. So I don't have money because rich people, let me tell you, they'll pay for the therapist to come to the house. And then you'll do what they call exposure work. So no one's going to do that with a poor person, or it's going to be very, very, and I mean very hard to find.
Yeah.
So there goes that. And so I ended up talking to a friend, and this is what I'm talking about, peer support. Sorry, it just makes me emotional.
No, please.
He's like, call me. I said, okay. At that time, I wasn't able to go to a restaurant. I couldn't even get a cup of coffee. To me, that was so meaningful.
Yeah.
I wanted to get a cup of coffee. I just wanted to be able to get a cup of coffee. Restaurants to eat, maybe that would have been a goal down the line. But if I could get a cup of coffee, that would have been big for me. But I couldn't do that because I couldn't leave my house. So she said, call me. All you're going to do is just touch your doorknob to your room. Woo! Panic attack. I'm like, oh my God. I'm going to start hearing voices. I'm going to start seeing things. I don't want to go back out there, And she's like, we're going to breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And she taught me these coping skills.
Mm.
Next, the front door. Next thing you know, I'm outside my house, but I'm running back in. She goes, it's okay. Woo!
You did.
Yes!
Yes,
You said outside. That's what matters. You said
Yes.
outside. You said you said it. Next thing you know, I'm walking the block. And I'm like, oh my God, I walked the block. And unless someone has been through that experience,
yeah,
they don't know how much it takes to do that. They don't know how difficult that is. It is so overwhelming, so exhausting. Every time that I would do that, I would come back to my bed and sleep for so long because it was just so exhausting.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, you know, with peers, I was able to do a lot of things. They were guiding me. They were sharing the things that work for them, like listening to music when you hear voices, which works for me, like putting your feet without shoes into a cold floor or into ice, and that grounds you back into the reality or earth realm, you know. And just doing these different things that were helpful and resourceful. I didn't learn none of that with a therapist. None of it. And here's the thing, I went back to therapy because I was like, oh, let's try it again, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember that I asked my therapist and a psychiatrist, when can I go back to school? Oh, you have to let go of that dream. A person like you can't ever go back to school or work.
Wow.
You have psychosis. That's it. You're never going to be able to do that. Mind you, this is a time where I'm barely leaving my house.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to just use my bathroom alone because I'm hearing voices and I'm seeing things and it's overstimulating. I'm struggling to eat because the rice turns into worm. The pasta turns into little dots that have like creepy crawlers in it or insects. So I'm really struggling. But for this person, it's like, you're never, ever going to go back to work and you're never going to go back to school. My peers, on the other hand, they're like, heck no. Don't let them define you. No, you're gonna go back to school. What do you want to do? What's your passion? What do you want? What's your joy? What do you want to do? I said, ENT, sign up.
Yeah.
Go do it. And I remember that initially it was a struggle because of the voices. It would take me hours, like 3 to 4 hours to read just one chapter. Because, and I'm talking about a 3-page chapter, because one sentence I would hear so many voices, what I told you before, the 50 radios, and then someone's talking to you. So I would have to read like placing the person in the stretcher, placing the person in the stretcher. I said placing the person in the stretcher, but so that it can go in through all the voices and I can actually be able to comprehend it, because the voices was just so much. And again, it was peers who were like, the more you train your brain to read through the voices, the easier it's going to become. Don't give up. Push through it. Push through it. And sure enough, I learned coping skills. That's not to say I don't still have those experiences. I still do from time to time, even through work. But because of that experience, I'm able to pause and say, okay, I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm going to take a break. It might be an hour, it might be 3 hours. And then I'm going to come back when I've settled. So it takes me longer maybe than someone else, but I'm able to work through it because my peers help me. I returned to school. No thanks to my therapist or psychiatrist. In fact, I went back to school against the recommendation. And it was my friends. They were like, nope, you got this. Whoop, sign up.
Yes.
And my first semester, I did struggle because, again, the voices, the hallucination, it did get intense, especially through midterms, because stress is a huge trigger for me. And so I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to process this?
Yeah.
And I remembered that I went to see an academic advisor because I thought, oh, maybe they'll recommend support or resources or something. At that time, I didn't know my ADA rights. I didn't know about accommodations, which oftentimes I find that's the case with mental health, because it's not often talked about as disability. But this lady, she goes, just like that, oh, people like you, they can't make it in a highly academic school like this one. So I'm going to give you a paper. Here's the paper. Take this to all of your professors, because the best thing you can do for yourself is drop out. What?
Whew.
So I took that paper. Thankfully, I took it to a professor who was an absolutely amazing professor. And honestly, I feel like I'm here because of him. He said, I'm not signing that. He cursed. I will repeat. But he goes, I'm not signing that paper. Get that away from me. And I said, but they're telling me that this is my option. And he said, no, it's not. You're one of my best students. You may do things differently, but you're going to get support. I need you to go to the disability department, to the counseling department, and to the deans of students. You're going to get letters. You're going to get accommodations. They're going to walk you through it. You're not dropping out. And that semester, I ended up with a GPA of, I think, a 3.5.
Wow.
And long story short, I ended up graduating magna cum laude.
Yeah.
And my last 2 to 3 semesters were all, quote, quote, very difficult classes, all upper classes. I'm like, I would have missed out on this whole entire experience.
That's right.
On my dreams, on my goals, because, quote, quote, professionals told me, a person like you can't make it. A person like you can't do it. It was just so horrible. And then it was because of that professor that I ended up finding a therapist, thankfully, who I've been with. We're going to celebrate almost 6 years.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yes, and they are phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. He's phenomenal. And it was similar. I was supposed to get another therapist, actually. And this is important because the person was white, cis, but queer. And they were like, oh, you need to drop out. We need to deal with your traumas. We need to deal with your hallucination and your auditory stuff. We have so much work to do with your diagnosis and your mental illness. That's what they call it. And we have to basically fix you. Like, she was short of saying that. We basically have to help you before you can even think about going back to school. My therapist identifies as a person of color, transgender, queer, Latinx. And so we definitely identify more. And I didn't have to explain so much of myself.
Right.
They got me, and they were the total opposite. They were like, you don't have to drop out. No. We're going to figure it out. And so we did. I just needed longer breaks. Instead of 5 courses, I needed 4 courses. And so that was, that might be too lengthy of a talk, but that was a little bit of my healing journey that I don't think I've ever shared with anyone, to be honest. This is the first time I'm sharing it. And through that therapist, and the wonderful people I met across across my way, like that professor.
Yeah.
I've been able to learn about accommodations, knowing that sometimes I just require a little bit more time, especially when I'm hearing the voices or I'm seeing things, that I just need different applications,
Mm-hmm.
because my executive function is different than other folks. So just learning what I need, And so, yeah, and that's just been part of my healing.
Oh my goodness. Adilsa, thank you so much for sharing these really personal stories of your life, and for the first time sharing some of these experiences that I feel so grateful that you felt safe to express that. It's super important to me to have your voice heard, and I, if I silence that, it wouldn't be authentic what we're doing here. And I never want anybody to feel anything other than just safe in this space. And what you have done and what you have brought tonight is just amazing. And to know that you have a fantastic peer support group. Your therapist sounds like an amazing person, and they've just really gone above and beyond in the fact that you are able to find that person to help you. I mean, it's coming from all angles, that healing isn't just one type. There's various forms, there's various lengths of time. I mean, it's different for every single person. So what you have done and what you've shared with me, it just means, I don't know, my heart just wants to explode, and I just want to give you this massive because you have taught me so much in this space, so much, a lot that I didn't even know. And I'm like, I can't wait to share this with everybody. I just
And I would like to add, just for folks that are watching, for a long time, I thought about recovery and that word recovery,
Mhm.
Which is like regaining yourself. But I'm never going to be the person I was before psychosis. Never.
Right.
And I don't want to be. And healing, when I say healing, I'm talking about things like things that trigger me,
Mhm.
things that maybe upset me, things like that. I don't think that but this is me, Allilsa, just me, my own personal experience. For me, I don't think that there's healing per se from psychosis.
Right.
I think that one learns how to cope, how to manage,
Mhm.
or how to work with whatever comes up.
Yeah.
Again, within this realm, rather than heal. Because when you think about healing, I think about therapists, and they often say, "Do you still hear voices? Oh, you're not healed yet." I'm healed in my own way. I
Yes.
learned to
Yes.
live with my experience. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that because healing can be so different for everyone.
Yes,
And I
absolutely.
don't want for folks listening to say, oh, this is healing or this is recovery. Everyone has their own journey.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own path to go through, whatever that looks like for you. And only the person, I strongly believe, gets to say what is healing,
Mhm.
and if they want to or not use the word recovery.
Yeah.
Only the person gets to decide that. For me, I don't think I'm going to ever heal, or like I said before, get cured from psychosis. I just learned to live with it. So I still have days, just recently, where I hear voices and I see things, and I need to sleep for the next 2 to 3 days
Right.
and do nothing.
Right.
It's just happening. But and for a therapist, I'm in quote what they call crisis mode. For me, I'm just having an experience right now,
Mhm.
It might be very overwhelming,
Right.
but I need to ground. I just need to
Sure.
come back. And for me to come back to that grounding space, to that earth space, I need to rest. I need to notice that I'm overwhelmed, and I need to notice that the stimulus around me is too much. So I need to turn off the TV, turn off everything except music, and do that. Anyways, just saying that for whoever's listening, just so they know, healing really looks different, and how you define it is up to you.
It's really incredible to hear the various definitions that people have of healing, because it's so incredibly different from one person to the next. And I don't believe in cures, because to me, it also insinuates that there's something wrong and that you need to be fixed. And I don't believe that people have things wrong with them. I think that there are situations that we go through that have a big impact on us. Just like you will probably never get a chance to cure cancer forever, because at some point it could come back. I think it's a journey. It's learning to cope and to move forward from one moment to the next. And it's simple as that, is thinking we're never going to be the same person we were even last week. I mean, there's going to be so many different moments in our life that we're never going to be that same person. So be the best person you can be at this moment. So my life motto is, don't be a dick and be a good human. So. Pretty simple.
And I love what you said.
Be kind.
It's a journey. It's just a journey.
Yeah. It's just accepting it and having that space. Again, this is what I want to really drive home, especially in our conversation. Do not judge anybody. Do not define what anybody should be doing or what you think they need to be working on. And let that person have a voice, full autonomy. Let that person and do what they need to do in that moment, whatever it looks like. Meet them where they are. Ask them those questions. How can I support you? What is it that you need? Whatever you can do and articulate it, make sure that person knows that you're there. Even if it's just here. Maybe we're not even talking, but just here.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's get a cup of coffee or tea.
Yes. Just be a good human. Be a kind human being. It's not that hard to be a good person. We have that choice. So wrapping all of this up, I mean, we have such an incredible discussion, and I cannot express how excited I am to share this. What message or takeaways would you want somebody listening to have of your stories?
Well, just what I said earlier, if someone who's young or old, it doesn't matter what age, that's just processing their sexuality or their gender or how to identify who they are, that I've heard this before from the Trevor's Project. It's called the Trevor's Project campaign. And I strongly believe it. And it's a campaign that says it gets better. And it does. And if you just, give yourself that opportunity to find the folks that are going to support you, your chosen family, resources that are supportive for you, I believe that it gets better. That the taunting, the bullying, to not give into that, to not give into that, especially if you're living in a community that's very extremely homophobic and transphobic. Find your community. That's not your community. If they're taunting you and hurting you, that's not your community. Find a community that's going to lift you up, that's going to support you, that's going to love you. I promise you, there's someone out there ready to support you and uplift you and be with you. I know I felt so alone through the journey of coming out and finding folks, you know, but I found my community. It took a while, I'll say that, and it does take a while, but I found my community, and they're very supportive, very uplifting, very encouraging. And the same thing goes with trauma and mental health. You know, find the community that's going to, like you said just a few minutes ago, that's going to create that safe space. This is amazing for me. I felt completely safe. I have shared today things I've never shared before, but I feel very comfortable, very safe, also ready to share. And so yeah, find that space, find the people who are going to create that safe space for you. I've personally met folks who want to talk about their childhood trauma, and they felt safe with me, and I have felt safe with other folks to process childhood trauma. And this is just an example, you know, but it could be anything. It could be the mental health experiences, it could be psychosis, it can be bipolar, it can be PTSD, whatever the case may be. Finding, you know, a group of people or one person that you can talk to, that can help you find resources and really support you is so important. It's so important. And then the other thing I would say is, if you don't find the space, because oftentimes we don't find the space that's intersectional, for example, if you can create it, create it. I am cheering you on. I root for you. Like, you just created this phenomenal space, this scars space to tell our scars that I strongly believe in this project. It's a beautiful, empowering project. You know, so I encourage others, just like Lindsay, to create spaces. You know, oftentimes we're waiting for someone else. That happened to me with Active Minds. You know, can you change it? Can you change it? Can you change it? Can you? They're not going to change it. So I created Peer Mental Health Alliance. So create it, because you may be the community someone else is waiting for. You may be the person someone is dying to meet, and who is going to change someone else's life. So if you feel that you're being called to lead, to start something, to start an idea, a project, do it.
Go after
do it. There's people right now, they're waiting for you. And don't ever think, oh, it's already been done. Because you know how many mental health groups exist, how many campaigns and projects, but yet there's nothing like SCARS. There's nothing like Peer Mental Health Alliance. Everyone has something different to contribute. There's a niche that only you bring to the table, and there's people waiting for what you're going to bring. So that's the message I would love to leave folks.
Well, thank you so much, Allilsa. You have been a light to so many on these really important topics, and you have created that community for people, and I am honored to feel a part of this community with you, because I feel like there's so much that people can do together. Just getting together, just figure it out. You may have the most eclectic table of people, and that's the best thing, because you're coming with so many different minds, and that's where real change happens, is that open-mindedness. So I just want to say thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart. And folks, please find a way to connect with the community that you need. And if you need that community, Allilsa can be that person for you. They are a fantastic resource. Do not underestimate the power of connecting with another human being. It's powerful.
And just to throw it out there, and also look for in groups in Facebooks or Twitter, whether that's mental health or trauma or other things, people that you can relate to, people that you're like, oh, I really love what this person is saying, and that may be resourceful or uplifting and encouraging to you, because there's so many amazing resources.
Awesome. Do you have resources where people can connect?
Yes. So there's this organization called Project Let's. They are absolutely phenomenal.
Okay.
BEAM, BEAM. It's a mental health organization for Black folks. Absolutely phenomenal. There's let me see. There's one called, I think I'm gonna butcher it, Depression. Let me look for it, because this is another amazing resource that I also follow as well personally. And these are just some of my favorite mental health. And the reason they're my favorite is because they're very community based, and they talk about socioeconomics and privilege, and it's from all different angles. So it's not just people with money, it's people who don't really have access to therapists or spaces. And so.
Okay. If somebody real quick was like, hey, I really like this conversation that I've heard here today. I want to get in touch with him about this conversation or about what we talked about with your consulting. How would somebody be able to reach out to you?
Oh, yeah. So, and first, I want to share that resource. So it's called Depressed While Black.
Okay.
So those are the three from the top of my head that I'll recommend. Project Let's, BEAM, BEAM, and Depression While Black.
Okay, great.
And for me, if you did wanted to talk to me, I'm always happy to talk to people. Always. Folks can tell you, I reply. Sometimes I don't reply right away because I'm a little busy, but I promise I will get back. So you can contact me either through Twitter, which is Allilsa-F, which is ALLILSA-F, or through Instagram, which is Inspirational Mental Health.
Excellent. And we'll be sure to add those handles so people will be able to find those and connect with you. So we want to make sure that you're available to folks who need it. Allilsa, thank you for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. This has been a dialogue that I feel has been much needed, one I have been anticipating, and is so special to me. You're a beautiful friend. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.